Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and as Josh can tell you, when I charge for sex, it's a lot more than $300.
You know, even after all this time, you still surprise me with what element of the film you are going to relate to your life, and that is not the one I would have imagined that you would pick. I was thinking you would give some sort of very precise speech about fate or something.
Oh, that would have been fun to do.
You went with that.
Hard boiled,
Yeah.
like, there are certain things I can help you with, certain things I can't. This is one of those things I can't help you with. You got yourself in this situation. You're going to have to get yourself out of it. That would have been fun too. So.
Yeah, no, but I think, commit to the whole amount that you charge for sex because you should respect yourself.
Yeah, my body is my business, according to this podcast. So
that is so true. So this is our special 10th season of Awesome Movie Year. And it's not really an anniversary because it's not 10 years, but it's 10 seasons. And so we have been looking back at all of the years that we've covered in previous seasons, one episode on each of those years to take a look at a film that we didn't cover, but we had hoped to cover. And so for this episode, we are looking back to our season on the films of 1996 and to the first feature episode. In the actual season, we talked about Wes Anderson and his film Bottle Rocket. And now we are going to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson and his debut film, Hard Eight. And Awesome Anderson Year will be our new podcast coming soon.
Well, what other Andersons will you add to that, Josh?
We could talk about Paul W.S. Anderson.
Yeah.
Sure. And then that's all I got.
Famed Hall of Fame wrestler Arn Anderson. Maybe he can make an appearance.
I mean, I was thinking of filmmakers, but sure, why not? We can just
anyone with the last name Anderson.
Anybody, really. Right. And then that'll make it wide open. Yeah. There's a lot of people.
You just did The Matrix and talked about Mr. Anderson. So
that's true.
This was a bad idea, Josh. You're awesome, Anderson.
No, it's definitely nearly as good as Feel the Burns, our Ed Burns.
Feel the Burns coming soon, where Josh and I cover every Ed Burns film chronologically. I've seen many, he hasn't seen any, and we're going to go through them all. Write in, tweet us, let us know you want us to do Feel the Burns.
That's not happening. So let's talk about Hard Eight, however, which was Paul Thomas Anderson's first film. And it was based partly on his short film from 1993 called Cigarettes and Coffee, which played a lot of film festivals and was a big sensation and got him the attention of the Sundance Institute. And that was where he was able to develop this film further. Philip Baker Hall is in the short film playing basically the same character. Jason, I don't know, did you watch the short?
I did. It was fine. It's not great, but it's pretty good. It shows the promise. Who's the guy who played opposite him in there?
Kirk Baltz, I think is his name.
He was good in the film, I thought those two were
he was all right. I mean, he's no John C. Reilly.
No, but that's a high expectation to live up to,
Right.
I mean, for a short film, if you saw this at a festival, you'd be like, hey, that's pretty good. And it's got Philip Baker Hall and Miguel Ferrer.
Yeah, no, that's true. It definitely feels kind of short film festival-y. And you can tell that he certainly progressed further as a filmmaker just in those next few years before making this film. But it's definitely an interesting piece to watch as sort of background to see where this one came from. So appropriately, given the support from Sundance, Hard Eight premiered at the 1996 Sundance Film Festival. And it also played at the Cannes Film Festival in 1996 before getting a larger release in theaters in the US in February of 1997. It was not a hit. It grossed about $222,000 on its budget of $3 million. But it was pretty well regarded and obviously set up Paul Thomas Anderson for quite a career. It was nominated for 5 Independent Spirit Awards for Best First Feature, Best Cinematography for Robert Elswit, Best Male Lead for Philip Baker Hall, Best Supporting Male for Samuel L. Jackson and Best First Screenplay for Paul Thomas Anderson. It did not win any of those awards, but that's a pretty solid showing.
Yeah.
Five nominations.
Robert Duvall won Best Male Lead for The Apostle that year, so no shame in that. But it's interesting that they would leave John C. Reilly and Gwyneth Paltrow out of those nominations. Everyone's great in this movie, but I don't know how you separate those two from the other two.
Yeah, I agree. Especially I think to pick Samuel L. Jackson, as great as he, of course, is, but to pick him as the supporting nominee instead of John C. Reilly, I feel like that's a weird choice. Philip Baker Hall really, this is his movie, and he's just fantastic in this. So I feel like to pick him out over those other actors makes sense. But to pick one of the supporting performers, it does seem a little arbitrary.
Josh, sorry to jump in, but I wanted to jump back to where you were talking about how little money it made. It was Reicher, which is a TV company that was moving into film distribution. And I think they went bankrupt or just basically stopped distributing films. So like you said, it was completed in 96. It got out a little in 97. I don't think it got those Spirit Awards till 98. It was a whole rigmarole.
Right. I don't think this is a movie where it was like rejected by audiences. It's one of these that maybe just didn't get to audiences. And I'm sure, as we talked a lot about, I think when we did our season in 1996, a movie that got an audience later on home video, not only because Paul Thomas Anderson went on to become this very successful, famous filmmaker, but just in general, I can see, people walking through Blockbuster and look, hey, there's Gwyneth Paltrow, who was a huge star. I don't know that movie. Let me check that one out because I watched Shakespeare in Love or something like that.
Yeah, and then as we've discussed before, when we were, reading Premiere Magazine and all these things in the 90s, and this was like, hey, you probably missed this, but you should go check it out. This would definitely be one of those movies.
Absolutely. Yeah, this would have been on a list like that. And again, critics were very positive over this one and certainly would have, led a charge to recommend this movie further as it came out on home video. It got 2 thumbs up enthusiastically from Siskel and Ebert on an episode in which they give 10 thumbs up to every single movie they talk about, including Booty Call. So it caught them in a very good mood.
Where did those thumbs end up for Booty Call?
Yeah, we don't want to know about that, but thanks.
Why didn't we cover Booty Call on this season?
I think we'll get to it eventually. It seems inevitable, right? How can you not talk about Booty Call?
I usually do, but it's late at night.
There you go. So Roger Ebert, in his review, said, there turns out to be kind of a plot. There is even a secret from the past, although not the one we expect. But the movie isn't about a plot. It's about these specific people in this place and time, and that's why it's so good. It listens and sees. It observes, and in that it takes its lead from Sidney, who is a student of human nature and plays the cards of life very, very close to his vest. Movies like Hard Eight remind me of what original, compelling characters the movies can sometimes give us. Like David Mamet's House of Games, or Mike Figgis's Leaving Las Vegas, or the documentary Crumb, they pay attention to the people who inhabit city nights according to their own rules, who have learned from experience and don't like to make the same mistake twice. And Sidney that he's referring to in there is Philip Baker Hall's character, the veteran gambler. And of course, we did a whole episode on Crumb, and I don't know that that's the first thing I would have thought of when referencing this film, but I can see certainly Leaving Las Vegas is an obvious comparison here, and maybe House of Games. I did see comparisons to David Mamet in terms of the dialogue in a couple other reviews as well.
The two that I thought of, and maybe because they're related to this podcast, were two of your former picks. Your 1967 pick with our friend Lee Marvin.
Yeah.
Do you want to say what that pick was, or no?
Oh, I thought you were going to continue your great impression. No, it was Point Blank. I don't know. I feel like Point Blank is a lot more crime violence-y. Not that this movie doesn't eventually have violence, but that doesn't really seem like the point of it.
I guess so. And then in 77, when you had picked the Late Show, it just seems like these kind of hard-boiled, like Ebert said, learning from your experience type things, and guys who play it close to the vest. I guess it seems like your type of movie is what I'm saying.
I mean, it is definitely my type of movie. I like this film, and when we were planning this season, I definitely was arguing in favor of covering this film. Obviously, Paul Thomas Anderson doesn't need my support. I mean, plenty of people love Paul Thomas Anderson's films, but it is my kind of film. I definitely enjoy this film a lot, even above some of his other more well-known films. And I can't stand David Mamet, so I feel like the dialogue here is like, yes, it's stylized, especially some of those speeches, as we were referencing earlier, that Sidney gives, but it felt more real and honest and natural to me than David Mamet films ever do.
I also, well, I mean, I think that also maybe spurring from the short film, where it's like, we're going to have our coffee and cigarettes and then we'll talk. Well, why can't we talk before our coffee and cigarettes? Because coffee and cigarettes is, an oath or a habit or whatever it is, a ritual, that
Right.
kind of repetition, which you see some of here, but that's fine. Also, the movie was originally called Sydney, and the distributor made him change it to Hard 8, which he agreed to as long as he would get his final cut, because he did not like the studio cut.
Yeah, I don't know what the studio cut was like, but that seems like a very good compromise, especially because Hard 8 is a better title anyway.
Yeah. Also, though, Anderson's first cut was like 2.5 hours. So that's when they took it from him and were like, hey, dude, no.
Yeah, and I agree. Whatever the compromises were that were made, I feel like we ended up with the right film with the right title. So that's a very good thing. Owen Gleiberman in Entertainment Weekly said, gamblers live for the moment, for the next bet, the one that will take them over the top. And this gilt-edged noir contraption is an enjoyable wallow in life is a craps table existentialism. Played with a riveting poker face by Philip Baker Hall, the Richard Nixon of Robert Altman's Secret Honor, Sidney hovers over the action like a pouchy-eyed Mephistopheles, all-seeing, all-controlling, all-mysterious. Writer-director Paul Thomas Anderson crafts a plot of manipulation and chance, in which some zigs and zags are more convincing than others. Still, his feel for scuzz, for people living at the raw extremes of appetite, is palpable. Hard 8 invites you to share in the gambler's highs, but it also knows they're illusory. Even when you win, you're alone. And I don't know if comparing Sidney to Mephistopheles is really right. I mean, he's not a villain. He's not evil, right? He's like a good guy, despite some things.
So far, you don't like any of the comparisons. What about Heraclitus? Would you compare him to Heraclitus?
You're just naming old-time sounding things. Is that? I don't even know who that is. Honestly,
Greek. I think he said you can never stand in the same river twice.
Okay.
Which kind of can.
That could fit.
Yeah, that could pretty much fit anything.
I mean, more than being like the devil, I think.
Yeah. Whatever, you reviewers in your flowery language, like whatever, dude.
Okay, that's your response to that?
No, I mean, he had nothing to say about, like, yes, he saw a lot of things, and then it took a twist on him, and he had to react to the twist on him, right? It's, I mean, again, why are we over analyzing? It's just a good, simple, slow burner.
This is a podcast where we analyze films, so I feel like that's not an unreasonable thing to do.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm saying that review was overanalyzation.
All right, fair enough. I mean,
but no, I mean, in the end, this is a character study. Yes. And it's a character study about really 3 or 4 different characters, and that's what makes it work. That kind of change in the middle is effective because we have gotten to know the characters and their relationships at this point.
I agree with you there. I felt like his comparison, I don't think it was overanalyzing necessarily. I just thought that one particular comparison was inaccurate and maybe misses the point that Sidney is not evil. He's not, even if he's manipulating situations, he's doing it for the sake of sort of personal atonement is what it seemed like to me, which is the opposite of what Satan would want, really.
Right. Well, I mean, and we don't know all of his past. We know, can we spoil this now? I guess if you haven't seen it, watch the movie. Sidney's relationship with John, stems from the fact that he killed John's father in Atlantic City. He shot him in the face, basically. From what we can gather, he was like an old time, kind of tough guy. And John's father owed money, didn't pay. That's what I got out of it. So he had to kill him. And he feels guilty, and he creates this really parental relationship with John now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think more than that specifically, his whole demeanor and everything that he does and the way that he responds when Jimmy, the Samuel L. Jackson character, confronts him with his past, to me shows that he's trying to atone or become a better person for everything that he did at that time, stuff that we don't specifically hear about. I mean, if he killed John's father, probably he killed other people. Probably he did other bad stuff, and he's trying to become a better person, whether that's through helping John or through helping Clementine, the Gwyneth Paltrow character, or just being this kind of upstanding guy, that's his motivation now at this point in his life.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, obviously, everything he does is with John and Clementine is to help them. But I think, like you said, that's to atone. Maybe he's just out of that life. Maybe it was, not the easiest lifestyle to live, always, having to do things in the dark. And he's just trying to move past that. But I don't know if that whole thing is because he wants to become a better person or just because he's old and tired.
Well, maybe better person is too, but he's definitely, I think, trying to atone or trying to make up for what he did. Maybe he can't ever really be a better person, but he's trying to make some amends in his own way.
Certainly with John, yes.
Yes. So Stephen Holden in the New York Times said, as Hard Eight tracks the mentor-protege relationship that Sidney cultivates with a gravity befitting Rod Serling introducing the Twilight Zone, the movie smells like one of David Mamet's fiendish stories of grifters embroiled in tricky games of cat and mouse. But Paul Thomas Anderson, who wrote and directed the movie, which is his first feature film, has other things on his mind. Sidney's motives aren't revealed until the film is almost over. Let it suffice to say that they have to do with guilt and with a warped, grandiose sense of honor. One of the many strengths of this beautifully controlled, slow-moving film is that the revelations come as a complete surprise at the same time that they make psychological sense. So there's another little take on what motivates Sidney to do what he does.
Yeah, I mean, what I agree with there is kind of echoed in that, like, everything that comes from a logical standpoint, and we're invested in it because we're invested in the characters at that point.
Yeah. I mean, there were some things, not that particularly the sort of revelation about Sidney's background and what he did, but there were little moments here where I was like, I'm not sure I entirely understand the motivations. But overall, I think this is a very effective character study, and you do get to know these characters really well over the course of the film. And that is a great strength of Paul Thomas Anderson's writing and directing, but also the actors, all of whom are really, really good, as we've said.
Do you have an example of one of those moments that didn't work for you?
I mean, I felt like the sort of central, the big event that sort of turns the plot in the middle of the movie when Clementine is stiffed or whatever, stood up by this John who won't pay her for her services, and she calls John to help her, and he goes to this hotel room, and they knock the guy out, and they call his wife to threaten her so that they can get their money. The idea of Clementine leaving, she's in a bar with John, like right after they've they spontaneously decided to get married, right? And the movie, I think, sells you on the idea that they're genuinely in love, even though they've essentially just gotten to know each other, that there's this real connection between them and they really feel it. And so yet immediately she just wanders off to, have sex for money with this guy. And I know it's sort of like, oh, that's just what she does. And it's, it's ingrained in her because it's a habit or whatever. But I just felt like that was I didn't entirely buy that. And then what comes after that, the idea that they would be fixated on this relatively small amount of money and that they would commit these really ill-advised acts to get the money because neither of them are super smart people, as opposed to Sidney. I could go with that, but that initial thing that she does, I just didn't quite buy.
Fair.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I thought you were going to mount a counter argument there.
No, I mean, I think you laid out a fair point, and you laid out why it does work and why it didn't work for you. So I have to give you your due, Josh.
Thank you, sir. So
I meticulously thought this out like Sidney himself.
Right, you are much like him in your planning of all your actions. So Jason, did you see this movie maybe when working at Blockbuster?
I think that is exactly when I saw it. Again, knew about it. Might have known about it simply from that Ebert and Siskel and Ebert review. Like, hey, you got to check this thing out. And obviously, Boogie Nights was a huge deal to us indie nerds when it came out. So I think I probably saw Boogie Nights and then even maybe Magnolia and got back to this one at some point.
Yeah, I saw it a little later than that. I definitely had seen Boogie Nights and Magnolia, and it might have even been further after Punch Drunk Love and There Will Be Blood, and I don't remember exactly, but it was later on that I kind of went back and caught up with it. And I want to say it probably was at least after There Will Be Blood, because that was when I was like, maybe I'm not really that into Paul Thomas Anderson, between that one and The Master. And going back to this, I was like, oh, wow, this is really, really good. And, made me sort of remember why I liked Boogie Nights and Magnolia so much, which I haven't seen in a really long time. So, yeah, and I've actually seen this movie 3 times now, because last year I wrote a article on Gwyneth Paltrow's 90s films and how great and underrated her acting is in that period. And so I watched this movie for that. And then, of course, again for this podcast. So I think it holds up really well. I think it's one of his best movies. And it's impressive that he made such a really strong movie right in his first try.
Yeah. Glad you brought up Gwyneth. She's great. I mean, like we said, they're all great, but like she really just was hitting a lot of home runs back then.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was kind of the point of what I was writing at the time, between this and Emma and The Talented Mr. Ripley, Sliding Doors, Shakespeare in Love, which of course she won an Oscar for, the Alfonso Cuarón Great Expectations, which I think is just an underrated movie in general. Lots of really, really, really good performances from her. And I think people tend to forget about that because she's so annoying now.
Well, yeah, once you bring out the vagina-scented candles, that's tough. That's usually the headline, Josh.
Yeah, and I'm not going to defend that stuff, certainly. But I think as an actor in the 90s, she really is very, very impressive. So.
How about you, Dave? When was the first time you saw this one?
Last night.
Wow.
I've always wanted to. This is one of those rainy day movies for me. Like, I'm going to finally get to it. And now I've watched it, and it was great.
All right. Well, I'm glad it, lived up to it after. I know, Dave, you're a big P.T. Anderson fan, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And you watched the short too, right? You really did research for this one.
I really liked the short as well. I thought it was great. And, especially for, such an early short for somebody like that to like really just have everything on display. It's really good.
Yeah, it's a shame that, I mean, we all watched it. I think it's like I don't know where exactly it came from, but it's clearly like a VHS rip that you can watch on YouTube.
Sure.
And it seems like this is a movie that deserves a big, nice home video, Criterion Collection release or whatever, and that they could maybe remaster the short to put on there as well. Because, I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson is, if anyone is going to get a fancy, spotlight on a label for movie snobs, it's going to be Paul Thomas Anderson.
Sure.
So anything else on the background for this film you want to mention, Jason?
Kind of a little fun Easter egg if you're into the P.T. Anderson films like Dave is. When Jimmy confronts Sidney, he says, I'm from back east. I know the same guys you know. I know Floyd Gondola. I know, Jimmy Gator. And in the next 2 movies, that the characters that Philip Baker Hall played were Floyd Gondola and Jimmy Gator.
Yeah. Interesting.
That's cool. I like that
little cinematic universe, or maybe not. If they're all just like they're like triplets or something. They all look like Philip Baker Hall.
I mean, I don't think because I mean, at least in I could see the Boogie Nights character, but I don't think that the beloved daytime talk show host Jimmy Gator would be the one giving the gossip on Sidney.
Yeah, probably not. But that's so still a nice little fun thing to spot. So. We will come back then in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on Hard 8. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our special 10th anniversary, not really anniversary, retrospective season thingy, we are talking about Paul Thomas Anderson's Hard Eight from 1996. And I think we all liked it, which is nice. It's impressive that this is his debut. I mean, this is, we've done this in every season talking about debut films. And I mean, in some cases, you can look at the films and say, all right, this is rough, but we can see how this is going to blossom into a really impressive career. And that's not to say that everything in this film is perfect, but I think there's a lot of really confident, successful filmmaking going on here that's more than just a debut. So, Jason, did you feel that way?
Yeah, I think you definitely see some of that in those Scorsese-style Goodfellas, tracking shots that go all the way through the casino or follow, Philip Baker Hall on these long walks. There's a lot of pieces that have to be connecting to make that shot right, and he does it a few times. But really what you are getting here is the beginning of that P.T. Anderson repertory theater, right? With Philip Baker Hall and John C. Reilly. And, that's kind of what we loved about him in the beginning, was he was using all these great actors, and even Philip Seymour Hoffman's in this one too, in ways that other people weren't using them. He realized they're great characters, and he was going to write great characters for them.
Yeah, a lot of what I saw, like in reviews too, for this is people talking about Philip Baker Hall, who, I mean, had been working steadily for 20 years at this point, but hadn't really had that kind of spotlight, other than that Robert Altman movie that multiple reviews mentioned, Secret Honor, where he plays Richard Nixon, which I've never seen. But other than that, he hadn't really gotten these lead roles. And yeah, you're right that Paul Thomas Anderson sees his potential and sees this guy should and could carry a movie. And obviously, they must have worked well together. I mean, Philip Baker Hall in that short film with a filmmaker who's obviously certainly at that point, like, not anybody. Hey, I'll be in your little short film, kid. And then goes on to be the star of this big feature. So I think you're right, whether it's him or John C. Reilly, even Gwyneth Paltrow, who, as we mentioned, can be a bit. I think she's great in the 90s, but certainly, as we see later, she's kind of in her own little world, maybe, and he can bring something out of her. So yeah, very impressive.
I thought so. This was a really vulnerable performance from her, and showed just how emotionally resonant she can be. John C. Reilly, I mean, this is basically the movie that broke him, if not, the first one where he was discovered. So, and you see all types of growth from him and a lot of fun collaborations with Anderson over the years. But it's interesting because in that short film, the character playing across Sydney was like a much tougher, more ready for the streets type of guy. And then John C. Reilly plays John as this innocent, or naive, I should say, not innocent, guy who is always in over his head and just has such reverence and looks up to Sydney in such a way that it's tough to, like, I don't know how you couldn't like John, the character, because he's so puppy doggish.
He is. I mean, I think, again, there's a line there between him being puppy doggish and naive and likable and him just being dumb. And I think there are certain moments, especially in the scenario with the guy that they kidnap in the hotel room, where you're just like, you're just stupid. And he can still be likable, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's him in over his head, as opposed to when he is just Sydney's protege and doing the things that he's telling him to do. And you see him ascend up the scale of a, casino hustler type.
Right. And I think even when we get that, so, Sydney kind of picks him up. He appears to be homeless. He's sitting outside this diner. Sydney picks him up, helps him out, shows him kind of this little, I don't know if we call it a scam, but a way to kind of work the casino. And that's sort of the beginning of his journey. And then we cut to 2 years later. And at that point, 2 years later, he's clearly, like you're saying, this casino hustler. He knows what he's doing. He knows all the angles. But even at that point, he's sort of like, he's just a reflection of Sydney. He knows all the angles because they're Sydney's angles.
Right. I'll have whatever Sydney's drinking is.
Right. Exactly. Or he dresses similarly. Or even at one point later, I noticed that when they're at that motel with the kidnapped guy and they finally figure out what to do when they're all leaving, they drive the same car. And that's not something that's even been mentioned, but you can see it there. So it's almost like, he's this hustler, which you think of as someone who's savvy and sophisticated and has figured things out. But really, it's just he's emulating everything that Sydney does, and he doesn't necessarily figure anything out on his own. I think that's an interesting character layer.
And we haven't seen, up until that point, we have never seen him commit any type of crime. So everything he's doing might just be on the level as a gambler, other than what we saw him do to the first casino, which who cares? Screw the casino.
Right. I mean, it's not necessarily a crime. It's just kind of like a deception of some kind. But I wouldn't know. I don't think it's illegal per se.
And Josh, this was shot on location in Reno, correct?
That it was. Yeah, the whole thing is in Reno. There's a moment in the beginning of the movie when Sydney is first teaching him that particular scheme. They're supposed to be in Vegas, but I think everything was shot in Reno, at least according to the credits. So hooray for Nevada.
I like Reno. I was there this summer or last summer, and I think this works way better in that kind of biggest little city than, biggest big city type thing. There's a difference between being a shark in Reno, being a shark in Vegas, right? So,
right.
And Sydney ends up in Reno from Atlantic City, and obviously he had done some time in Vegas, as they say. So it's an interesting setting, and I think he utilizes it really well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, no disrespect to Reno, but it definitely is always in the shadow of Vegas, is kind of the smaller scale version of that. But I think it very much works in that these are these kind of small time hustlers, and that's where they are. They're in Reno. They're not in Vegas, even if they've been to Vegas sometimes. So I definitely like that about it. One review, I was looking and trying to find maybe a negative review that had something interesting to say, and I didn't end up using it because I felt like it was completely misguided and got some facts wrong. But it complained about exactly what we're talking about, the idea that Reno is like too small time, and that's why are the characters there? Why aren't they in Vegas? And it's like, you really missed the point of the setting, I think, if you're complaining about that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when Jimmy, extorts Sydney, he says, I want $10,000. And Sydney says, I have $6,000. That's what I have, which is a callback to how much John needed in the beginning to bury his mother. Right. And he says, I have $6,000, and he gives it to him. And Sydney goes on one of his big speeches. And, I expect this will go our separate ways after this, but $6,000 is nothing to sneeze at. We'd all like $6,000, but at the same time, for a guy who has earned such reverence from everyone and dressed as like such a player, $6,000 really isn't much.
Right. No, I think that's true. And I think that also emphasizes, again, the sort of that these are kind of small time players, and they get by, they get free rooms and they get comped meals, and they make enough from their gambling that they can kind of keep going, but they're not high rollers. Even in the beginning, when Sydney is teaching John that scheme, and the point of it is to get comped a room to appear like you have more money than you really do. And he gets comped this room, and it's fine, but it's not like a fancy hotel room or anything in any way. And then later on, when we cut to the 2 years later, and they have what is clearly a much nicer hotel room, and it's got, multiple rooms to it. It's a big suite or whatever. John is still showing off to Clementine how he can get free pay-per-view movies by, switching the wire into his extremely small TV, which I thought was also a good detail, that like the little portable TV that he's carrying around in 1996 has a screen that's probably about the size of a cell phone screen now. And it's like, do you really want to watch movies on that even for free? But whatever.
It was a good scheme, but they're schemers, but they're workman schemers, right? Like, these aren't big time scores. Whenever they separate, Sydney says something like, I'll be at the sports book, or I'll be at this table, right? He's always working. He's in the coffee shop looking over numbers or this and that. So it's the life they chose, it's the job they chose, and they have to work hard to make it happen. So what did you think of after, we've kind of talked about the trouble that John and Clementine get into. Sydney kind of helps them take care of it. They end up on the run, and then Jimmy kind of extorts Sydney. What did you think of where the story went from there?
Yeah, I mean, I like that. Even if, like I said, the motivation for Clementine to end up in that situation in the first place, I wasn't sure that I entirely bought. But I like the way that it played out. And I think it's an emphasis of how much Sydney cares about John and Clementine and how much he feels obligated. I mean, obviously, as we learn later, he killed John's father. He feels like this duty to help John. But also, it's genuine. When he calls John later and he says he loves him, like, that's believable. We think that that's true. He sees this guy as basically his son. So I like that. And I thought that that was another demonstration of his competence. Unlike the two of them who got in over their heads and clearly don't know what they're doing and made the wrong decision basically at every point, he's like, all right, I know what's going to happen here. I know who's maybe called the police and who hasn't, and what kind of risk we can take and what kind of risk we can't take. And here's what you're going to do. This is where you're going to go. And, he's really efficient. And then he's also ruthless. And I think we see that, he's pragmatic. Like you said, Jimmy then blackmails him or extorts him and says, give me the $6,000. And he does. And it feels genuine when he's like, this is all the money I have, but it's not worth it to me to die to, hold on to this money. Like, I will give you the money because I value my life. But then he goes back and he kills Jimmy and is very methodical about it, is very calculating about it, and gets his money and moves on. And, you can clearly see that as much as he, loves John and Clementine and will do anything for them, even if they screw up in an incredibly awful way, on the other side, Jimmy's life is worth nothing to him. And it bothers him not one bit to kill Jimmy without a second thought.
And it's an interesting dynamic because he says that he doesn't like Jimmy, but he also underestimates Jimmy, and Jimmy calls him on it. Like, what do you think? I only work, security outside. No, I'm in the casino. I'm trusted, and Jimmy kind of gets over on him, but then Jimmy lets his guard down after that. And that's where he gets the comeuppance. So it's interesting that in this world, you can really never let your guard down.
Right. That's true. And I think that's something that Sydney, in his obviously long experience, has learned, and that maybe that was something that he didn't quite impart to John as effectively as he could have. And maybe John will learn that lesson now, or maybe he won't, because again, he's kind of dumb.
You're really hammering that point home, Josh.
I mean, it seemed like, and John C. Reilly is very good at playing like a likable dumb guy. So maybe that colored it as well, that I've seen him do that before.
I should really work on you. Hey, Sid, just
it's good.
Just here.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I think you've done a good job there. It's better than your Lee Marvin.
I never tried it before. I'll have what he's having. So,
yeah, that's a pretty good job there. You can make that work.
Well, Josh, to me, I think, we've kind of covered it. We see the promise of Anderson. We see this kind of really well thought out technique of how he shoots scenes. And then you can also see budget wise, there are just times where he has to get the basic coverage, right? But you see those things where he's able to pull different things from actors, and you can see why actors gravitate towards him because he writes interesting characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, regardless to budget, I that was another thing that I saw mentioned in a couple of reviews. And I mean, sure, this is obviously not a big budget movie, but there were never any moments where I was watching and I was like, oh, that was something they clearly couldn't do because of the budget. Like, I felt like it was perfectly within its capabilities. It never felt like it was stretching too far or that it was constrained or anything. So I felt like he approached that exactly the right way.
Cool. Should we rate this thing?
One more thing I just wanted to sort of weirdly bring up. Is this a Christmas movie?
I was wondering that too with that ending music.
Well,
and not just the ending, the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And at the point when Sydney and Clementine are having their conversation in one of the cafes, there's all like Silent Night and there's a whole Christmas medley playing in the background. And I hadn't noticed that the first time. But I guess, is this maybe in Reno, like here in Vegas, a casino, it's always just no time and you don't know when it's a holiday.
I think it's a Christmas movie. I think anything that takes place over that time period, like that would be a good article, because everyone always argues, is Die Hard a Christmas movie, right? Like before we got on, we were just talking about The Green Knight, which takes place at Christmas time of yore. That's a Christmas movie to me. It would be a good article, like 10 Christmas movies that you don't think are Christmas movies.
Right. I mean, certainly there are movies like I've seen that referenced in terms of The Green Knight recently, but I don't think I'd ever seen anybody talking about this as a Christmas movie. But yeah, I think it might be. So, do we want to rate this out of 5 hard 8 rolls, 5 rolls of the dice with an 8 or something? I don't know.
It sounds very complicated. So
that's fine. We can do something. Well, it's a movie about complicated gambling schemes, but we can do something more straightforward. What would you prefer, Jason?
5 soft 8s rolls.
Maybe five coffees and cigarettes, something like that.
There you go.
Sure. Five combos of cigarettes and coffee gets 3.5 from me, Josh.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 3.5 as well. But I think this is really good. And even if there's small elements that don't come together for me overall, if you like P.T. Anderson and you haven't seen this movie, you should absolutely see it. So, Dave?
3.5 from me as well. And yeah, it might actually go up on my next watch.
Yeah. It's a very good one. So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of Hard 8. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our special retrospective season, we are talking about 1996 debut Hard 8 from Paul Thomas Anderson. And of course, we're talking about this as a notable debut because Paul Thomas Anderson has gone on to have an amazing career and is at this point one of the most acclaimed filmmakers in the US, in the world. Right after this film, his next movie was Boogie Nights, and that was really his huge breakthrough, putting him on that level with other major filmmakers. Jason, you mentioned Martin Scorsese. I think especially with Boogie Nights, there were a lot of Scorsese comparisons and people seeing him as the next Scorsese maybe. And I think his career has gone in different directions, which is great. But that was really, I think, how he was regarded. And he definitely has that feel of kind of those 70s auteurs, even as he's continued to make various different kinds of films.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the story of when he was the director understudy or, for Robert Altman when he did Prairie Home Companion because insurance needed someone on set, like, he'd be a perfect guy because of all these ensemble kind of overlays that he goes through in most of his other movies right there. And I think his best movies are the ones that work them perfectly. Boogie Nights is a good example of that. So yeah, no, I mean, with this movie, Josh, I was going to ask you if you ever saw Jean-Pierre Melville's Bob de Le Flambeur.
I have seen Bob Le Flambeur, as well as the remake, The Good Thief, that Neil Jordan made, which I loved that movie. And that was actually why I watched Bob Le Flambeur, because I had loved The Good Thief so much. But both really good. Yeah, absolutely.
So Anderson credits that movie here as a big influence. Did you see that in here?
Maybe. I mean, it's been a little while since I saw that, but I can absolutely see that. And an overall, I think that's maybe slightly pre-French New Wave. Melville was more of a New Wave influence than part of that.
Right.
But yeah, I can definitely see that in there. I think you can see a lot of Robert Altman in here as well. I mean, not just because Philip Baker Hall's most notable film role before this was in an Altman movie, but I think that more than Scorsese, especially as Anderson's career has gone on, he reminds me more of Altman.
I agree, but it's what we're getting to is like, this is, other than maybe Punch Drunk Love, which I really like, this is the least sprawling of his films, I'd say.
Yeah.
And they all become, kind of with different types of results, they sprawl one way or the other.
Right. I mean, I think Licorice Pizza, his newest film, it kind of gets back to a bit of that being self-contained as well. I mean, it's broader, it's more sprawling than this, just because it's got more locations and I'm certainly like a bigger budget. But yeah, I agree. I feel like, to me, my least favorite Paul Thomas Anderson films are like these big, heavy, epic dramas. I'm not really a fan of There Will Be Blood or The Master. I like it when it's a bit more, character driven, I guess I would say. I don't like Punch Drunk Love just because I hate Adam Sandler, but I haven't seen that in a long time. And maybe I would be more amenable to it now. I don't know.
The thing, you mentioned, The Master is my least favorite. The only one I haven't seen is Phantom Thread, but also he is funny. He's got good humor. So when you don't see it, like, I think you do get some of that in There Will Be Blood. And I could see why you didn't like it. I, of course, did. Yeah, it's interesting. Licorice Pizza was a good movie, and it had some of that whimsy that I think he had lost in more recent times.
Yeah, I'm with you on the whimsy. Although I feel like Inherent Vice actually has a lot of whimsy to it, but I know most people don't really like that one.
I just think, I think you and I were talking about it. I know there's humor and fun, but it doesn't make sense all the time, or I don't know if I'm supposed to get it all the time or whatever.
Right. I mean, my feeling on that movie is that you're not supposed to, at a certain point, really understand what's going on because it's a movie about a character who doesn't understand what's going on. But I mean, I think that's a fair frustration to have with that film. People expect that you're going to be able to make sense of a movie, especially one that presents a mystery, and it is frustrating when you cannot. So Dave, do you have a favorite P.T. Anderson movie?
It's so hard, especially with how much I love Licorice Pizza, to make a list of his movies because they're all so different.
It's not that hard. There's only 9 of them.
Yeah, but it's like, are you in the mood for this? His big epic ones, his little bit lighter ones. I'd probably go Boogie Nights, though, as like just a simple answer.
Yeah, it's a solid choice. So as Jason mentioned, Philip Baker Hall went on to work with P.T. Anderson, both in Boogie Nights and in Magnolia. Even though he didn't become like a big star off of this, he works. The dude is 90 years old and still works constantly. Like, it's quite impressive.
One of the great character actors of our lifetime. And, Josh, we got to shout out his work in Seinfeld as the library cop.
Yes.
One of the great guest starring roles. I'm watching Modern Family with my daughter. He plays like that crotchety neighbor and everything. But yeah, movies like, we've talked about Say Anything and Truman Show, The Insider, Zodiac, which I know you love. And then he was just in that Messiah, that miniseries was the last thing, or limited series was the last thing I think he did.
Yeah, that was a Netflix series about Jesus. So, but that was from 2020. So he is still, I'm sure he's got other projects lined up. It's quite impressive. As you said, this was kind of a breakout for John C. Reilly. And he's done really an amazing job, John C. Reilly, of balancing like really goofy comedic roles. He works a lot with Will Ferrell, but he's also able to take on very serious roles and is completely believable and effective and successful in both modes. And I think that's really amazing. And he brings, in this movie, again, I keep harping on the idea that his character is dumb, but, he brings that kind of goofy, dumb guy energy to it, but you still take the character seriously.
Right. He really is underrated, I think, with his range, everything. I mean, he and Philip Seymour Hoffman were nominated on Broadway for True West, where they would switch parts every other performance. And, you have to be so good to do that, right? And obviously we know him, like you said. Look, Will Ferrell made some of the funniest movies of the last 20 years, and to keep up with him is, you got to be on your game, man. And I still love Step Brothers. People really love Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, which is his movie. And I think, he can pretty much do what he wants now. Wreck-It Ralph probably secured his future forever, right? So recently, Moonbase 8, Ultra City Smiths, and he will be in he's playing Jerry Buss in Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers with Adam McKay, where he beat out Will Ferrell for the part.
Yeah, that was a whole part of the rift between McKay and Ferrell. But
yeah, Josh, I got to shout out one other thing from John C. Reilly. Do you know what it is?
There's so many things. It's just, I don't know.
You drangus. Let's check it out with Dr. Steve Brule, one of my favorite Adult Swim shows, which I think you would hate.
Yeah, no, I do hate all that Tim and Eric stuff. But I mean, the fact that he can work in that world, in that weird Adult Swim, like anti-comedy world, and then work in the super mainstream comedy of Will Ferrell, and then be in like an indie drama, like the Sisters Brothers or something like that. I mean, to have that kind of range is pretty amazing. And I was looking, his only Oscar nomination is for
Chicago.
of all things.
Yeah.
And this is like when we were talking about Paul
Wow.
Giamatti and like, what did Paul Giamatti get an Oscar for? Oh, Cinderella Man. Like of all the things that he's done, I didn't even remember that he was in Chicago.
I did, because he sang Cellophane, Cellophane, I'm Mr. Cellophane.
I'm sure he was good, but I don't know. That just seems sort of arbitrary that was the one.
Yeah. Well, Gwyneth Paltrow, we kind of talked about how good she is, obviously, as a Wes Anderson fan. I always remember her as Margot Tenenbaum on top of that. And she's, still in the Marvel universe if she wants to be. What about The Politician? That show? Was that a show or a series that she just did?
Yeah, it's a Netflix series. Yeah, she doesn't really act much anymore. I mean, even the last few Marvel things she did, it was just like a cameo that she was in one scene or something. And I did not watch that. That show was, it's a Ryan Murphy production. And Brad Falchuk, who is Ryan Murphy's like producing partner, is married to Gwyneth Paltrow now. And so it seemed like her being in that show was kind of like a favor to her husband more than a big acting project. But I don't know. The show overall got very poor reviews. I'm not sure how her performance is in it, but she really doesn't seem all that interested in acting anymore. She's very focused on her Goop lifestyle company and all of the stuff that makes people hate her now and makes her come off as this entitled, out of touch rich person. That's really what she's all into now. But that was why I kind of wanted to, focus on the idea. Like she was a really good actor. And honestly, watching a lot of those movies of hers from the 90s, it made me think like, it's not only a shame that she creates this shitty, expensive stuff that no one needs, but like she was a good actor and she could have had a really great acting career that she seems to not be interested in anymore.
Sounds like you two have consciously uncoupled.
I think that we have. And you mentioned, Jason, Philip Seymour Hoffman, who has a great like single scene appearance in this film. Of course, he went on to be a big Paul Thomas Anderson collaborator and surely would still have been if he had not, sadly, passed away young. So, but you can see that just in the one scene that he's in this movie, his really magnetic presence.
But it's really cool that his son, Cooper Hoffman, is the star of Licorice Pizza and does a really good job.
Yeah, he's great in that. And John C. Reilly making a very, very, very brief appearance.
Right, as Herman Munster.
As Herman Munster, or as Fred Gwynn, who played Herman Munster. But I think he has one line. But that was I think that's his first work with Anderson since Magnolia.
Boogie Nights?
So I think he's in Magnolia too. But still quite a long time.
Josh, I want to bring up two other things, okay?
Yes.
You're talking about longtime Anderson collaborators. Robert Elswit, who was a cinematographer, has done 6 PTA films, and he has an Oscar for There Will Be Blood. So he's part of that kind of collective. Same way Scorsese works with a lot of the same crew members. And then, Samuel L. Jackson now we know is either Nick Fury or big bombastic Samuel L. Jackson, but in the 90s, I think he did 4 or 5 Spike Lee movies, 4 or 5 Tarantino movies, or from the 90s to now, let's say 5 of each. And, I recommend people go back. We've talked about Do the Right Thing, Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever. Some of his best work with Spike Lee might be kind of under the radar right now.
Yeah, and I think you're right that because he works so much, he's kind of become this caricature and people hire him to just like do Samuel L. Jackson, but he's really scary. Like that Jimmy is like a genuinely menacing guy. He comes on screen and you're like, don't mess with this guy. He's dangerous. And that's impressive.
And this kind of big Samuel L. Jackson persona, I think Tarantino has gotten the best out of it in Pulp Fiction and Django. So he's always got the memes going.
The memes are important. Yes.
Yeah. But I think he's got more in him. I want to see more in him of the range that made him what he was.
Yeah. He does seem like maybe he's coasting a bit. I mean, and dude is in his mid 70s or something at this point. I mean, he can coast if he wants to. But I think you're right that there could be something where he could really dig into something deeper with the right material. That would be cool to see.
I've got one other legacy thing. This was Paul Thomas Anderson's first, but it was also John Bryan's first as composer, who went on to work with him on 3 other films, 2 other films, 3 including this, but also one of my favorite film music composers. I mean, I just absolutely love his stuff.
Yeah, and what happened?
What other things has he done besides this? And not just P.T. Anderson, but other stuff.
Yeah, he did Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Synecdoche, New York with Charlie Kaufman. And then also I Heart Huckabees and a couple others. He also produced a lot of artists. He did Fiona Apple's albums, which I love her albums. She's so good. I know he worked with Kanye West too and some other artists.
Well, P.T. Anderson and Fiona Apple used to be an item.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say
Maya
what
Rudolph.
happened to his collaboration with P.T. Anderson, but maybe that's the answer to that.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Now it's Johnny Greenwood instead, who also
Yeah.
is extremely talented, of course.
Yes, absolutely.
So that is Hard 8, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out on social media.
Check us out on social media. I'm Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on everything. GoForJason.com is somewhere in 2021. Who knows? We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter.
I am at joshbellhateseverything.com, where I actually do have a couple new things. My once a year effort to update that website is happening right now. So check that out. Also, Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
And if you like us, we're on a lot of Piecing It Togethers lately, Josh.
Yeah,
Sure
yeah.
are.
I mean, listen to it anyway, even if you don't like us. Although I don't know
No,
why you're
but
listening
mostly
to this
'cause you like
podcast.
us.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can check out the Patreon. We still have one of our bonus episodes for You Only Live Twice, I think, is still available. But what else is on the
You only live twice.
And that always gives Jason the chance to do that. So, but I think
I'm-
you've had some good stuff there lately, right?
Yeah, I'm always posting Piecing It Together episodes. As soon as they get recorded, they go right up there, even if they're not going to come out for a while onto the main feed. So you can always get those early. And then I'm also posting commentary tracks for my albums on there. And I also have 2 soundtracks I'll be putting on there in the next couple of months.
Nice. And we'll probably get something of our own up there eventually again. So it's not just that one where Jason can sing every time. So
Yes.
check that out as well. And Jason, what is coming up in our next episode?
Josh, we are going to a documentary pick, and we're going to the year 2003. Now you see a lot of these type of documentaries following these socially awkward kids as they succeed or try to succeed in different ventures. But one of them that really started it was Spellbound, a delightful piece that we will talk about.
So tune in next time for Spellbound. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.